But anyway, we've got a little tab app here. Let's look at the code for this. All right. Is the color scheme decent out there for you? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to get rid of some stuff down here. No, I won't. So here's our app. It's I'm still using create class. It's my old friend. I just can't seem to put it down. Here's some tab data, just an array. Got a label and a description. Burritos, coconut korma. Then here we've got our tabs. Let's go look at what tabs does. We can see here that we give it an array of data that has a label and a description. Let's see what the code is doing. It's got some state. It's got an active index. So which one of these is the active one? We've got this thing to select a tab at an index. We can render all the tabs, render the panel. And here's our main render method. Render the tabs, render the panel. Looks good. So I shipped this app, and then my coworker, Jen, comes over to my desk and is like, hey, Ryan, I just got the designs for the new page from the designers, and they did the same tabs that you did. And I was thinking that maybe you had some code that I could just use. I said, yeah, there's a tabs component. Just feed it some data, and away you go. And so Jen imports tabs into our app and renders it, and everything is great. And then the next week, Jen comes up to my desk and says, hey, Ryan, I got some more designs from the designers, and of course they changed it. They want the tabs on the bottom. I'm like, okay. And she says, can the tabs do that? I'm like, no, but maybe we could do like, I don't know, sorry about the flashes. Maybe we could do something like tabs on bottom. See what that would look like. So we'll come up to our tabs. This is the render method of tabs. So I've got the tabs here, and I want them on the bottom, not on the top. But I want to be able to like pass it true for tabs on bottom or false and have it switch. So what's really cool about React is these divs here, this JSX, is really just the call to React create element. You know what? I'm going to switch the color scheme. This one that I think looks a little bit better in here. It's really just a call to React create element div. And this thing has a return value, which actually is just this object thing that has like some props and some stuff. But it's really like you can JSON stringify this thing if you wanted to and see that it's just like this object. And maybe we'll look at that in a second. But the point is, this create element just returns just this object. It's not in the DOM. It's not a DOM element. It's just this object that describes some UI. But it's not UI yet. It's just a description. So these divs get transpiled to React create element. And they have return values. I mean, we can see it here. This div is being returned. That's our return value of this method. So I can grab these tabs and move them up into their own variable. And then down here, I can render them. It's just data. Our UI is just data, just an object. Here's my panel. And down here, I can render the panel. I'm going to save that. We'll see it refresh in the background. And it all still works. At least I hope it does. OK. If you haven't done some React, check this out. Let's look at the panel. It's just this object, yada, yada, yada. It's got some props on it. I'm doing something kind of silly up here that I need to stop doing to get rid of that warning. Let's JSON stringify it and see what that looks like. If you're ever in a JavaScript interview and they ask you silly questions like, what's the second argument to JSON stringify? Tell them the answer is null. Oh, it's a circular structure. It's not always circular. Let's do a div here. Am I circular? Are they all circular now? Did something change on me? Bummer. Well, can't do that trick anymore. But the point is, it's just an object. It's an object that React takes and figures out how to make real elements out of it. But it's just a description. And so when we have these descriptions, we can move them up into variables. And now I can do something like this. I could say if this.props.tabs on bottom, yes, no. Well, if I want them on the bottom, now I can return an array, or I guess it's a return out of this expression. If I want the tabs on the bottom, then I'll do the panel on top, tabs on bottom, and vice versa. Check it out. Tabs on the bottom now. I can come back down here and switch this to tabs on bottom to false, and they'll be on the top. Ship it. So we had this little bit of code. We made our render method a little bit strange looking. It's like super sad because of these this ternary. Look, it's like sad on the left, sad on the right. But I'm very happy about it. Someone asked me earlier what things people struggle with the most in our workshops, and I just said JavaScript. I'm gonna add to that and say JavaScript expressions, because once you're in JSX, these are all just function calls, and as soon as you put that curly in there, really all you're saying is here's an argument to the div function or to the create element function. And so when we're passing an argument in, we can't have statements and blocks. Everything's got to be an expression. So you'll end up like finally understanding why Lisp people love Lisp so much as you get crazy with your expressions in your JSX. But you get wilder and wilder with it the longer you use React. Okay, so that's fine. I added a new prop. Did I bring my water up here? I didn't. Someone want to grab me one of those waters or maybe find mine that was sitting around? Yeah, that's it. If it's not mine, it's as good as any other. So a couple days go by, and Jen comes up to you and she says, I just realized that in our UI, some of these tabs get disabled. So how can I set some of these tabs to be disabled? Is there an option or something? And I'm like, no, there's not, but we can make one. Let's go see what Jquery Ui does. Who here has used Jquery Ui? All right. Still one of the best UI libraries out there. This is battle hardened. Let's look at their API. So they've got these options: active, classes, collapsible, ooh, disabled. Okay, so you select an element, you turn them into tabs, and then you pass in an array of indexes or indices, depending on which side of science you fall on. So I pass it these indexes, and then it will decide, okay, this one's disabled, this one's not. Seems good enough for me. I actually do that when I'm like building a new component in a new library. I always go to Jquery Ui and look at their options, and then I know like what I'm going to run into and what kinds of use cases people are going to have. So we'll do disabled. Let's disable the burritos because let's be honest, burritos are just big tacos. So we pass in disabled. And up here where I'm rendering my tabs, so this is rendering all the tabs. We're mapping over the data. We get a tab and an index. And we know if it's active by checking our state against its index. Return this thing. Okay, here we go. Is disabled equals this.props.disable.index of index does not equal -1. Okay. Wish me luck. I'm in one ternary already. is disabled, styles.disabled tab, otherwise is active. OK, looks good. Maybe we could put some things on some new lines maybe, and that'll help. Yeah, it didn't really help, but I'm really happy that these line up, though. OK. Got the style working, but it still changes when I click on it. On click, if we're disabled, don't put anything in there. Otherwise, let's use this function. I'm clicking. Maybe you can't tell. That's a nice click sound. Yeah. No, that was genuine. That was organic. How many click event handlers are there in a React app? One? Yeah. We could have 1,000 elements that we put an onClick, that we assign an onClick to in React. It's almost free. The only expense, as far as I understand it, is adding a property to one of these element objects. That's it. That function just kind of sits there, and then when you click, React has an event has a click event that's just watching the whole document, and it sees the source element, and it's the one, React is the one who created the real DOM element. I can't see you. That feels better. Good to see you. And React created that element, and so it can say, OK, this element got clicked. I made it. What's the virtual element on the virtual DOM that I used for it? And it finds it. And it says, OK, does this have an onClick on it? Oh, it does. And so then it creates a synthetic event and sends it. If it doesn't find it there, then it goes up and bubbles until it finds one, or it never finds one because you don't have any click handlers on it. So really smart. We used to manually do that, event delegation in MooTools and Jquery and just the DOM. Now we get this beautiful API of just saying onClick, call this function, and React does the performant bit for us. So if I'm rendering over and over and over these tabs, and I'm changing it to being disabled and then enabled and then disabled and then enabled, there's not really a big expense here like there would be if I was adding an event and removing an event and adding an event and removing an event. That'd be hard on the browser. But with React, it just handles that all for you. So that's kind of cool. I don't know. This tabs component's getting a little bit weird. Seems like every time we need to use it, quite a bit of code has to change in it. If you want to find the end of the road, let's go look at one of the best, I think probably the most used JavaScript component ever, the date picker from Jquery Ui. I'm friends with the developer who made this, Mark, and he made it before Jquery and then turned it into a Jquery thing and then turned it into a Jquery Ui thing. So this thing has been around for like 10 years, long time, maybe even longer than that. So it's been through it all. Check out the options. So this is not a criticism of the date picker. This is a criticism of how we used to compose our UI with these imperative libraries like Jquery and some server-rendered HTML. I'm going to call out some of these options, and I want you to think about what they might have in common. Alt field, alt format, append text, button image, button text, close text, current text, date format, day names min, day names short. Hide if no prev text. I love that one. Month names short. Next text, prev text.
They're mostly stylistic.
Stylistic. Okay, there's another word that you're looking for, but that's it. That's on the right track. A lot of them end in text, right? So stylistic, like what we're rendering. So all of these options are saying, what do you want me to render for the names of the months? Because if you localize your components, your app, like you've got to translate that to different languages, you can't just call, .datePicker on some jQuery element and be done with it. That thing's going to have some month names in there, and you need them to not be in English. You need them to be in a different language. This takes over all of rendering. It owns all of rendering. And so in order for you to get in there and do some translations, do some localization, or do anything custom with the styles or rendering at all, they have to open up all of these options and say, okay, what do you want the day names to be? What do you want the close text to say? And so what happens to these components that own rendering is they end up with a list of options like this. Who here in the room is sitting here thinking about a component in your React app that just keeps getting new options? Anybody? Yeah, getting a few hands out there. It always happens, and then you just add another option, add another option. And every time another team uses this component, they need 2 or 3 more options on it. This is a lesson that we learned the hard way with React Router. You gave us this route config and some components, and then we did all of the rendering of your whole app, essentially. But you need to pop in there sometimes and say, well, I've got like a user ID that I need to send as a prop to this component, but I can't because I don't get to render it. You do. And so we made options. We opened up little holes for you to be able to render things. There's a different way to do this, a way to give rendering back to the person using the abstraction. Because these abstractions, they're there to share some logic, but not necessarily some presentation. So maybe we can have these things just do the logic part, and the app can still handle the presentation of it. So I'm just going to trash all this. It's time for a rewrite. I hate rewrites, except when you want to do something that's fundamentally different. And in this case, we do. Hang on. Give me just a minute. We'll get there. Oop. Yeah, keep going. OK. I'm going to uncomment this all out. And what if we had an API that looked more like this? I say I've got some tabs, and here's my tab list. Here's one tab, here's another tab. If it's disabled, I can just say it's disabled right there. I don't need to pass in this weird array of indices. I can just say this one's disabled. Then I'll have my panels here. Right, this is kind of what it would look like if maybe the DOM shipped with a native tab component. We've got something a little bit similar to it. Select, and then inside, we do options. There's even option group, I think, right? So the DOM has this idea already in it in some of those built-in elements where we've got this parent component that wraps some other ones. And then there's some stuff that happens inside of there, right? These options have click handlers on them, right? The browser knows, so if I click on the select and then I'm scrolling down and I click one of these, I'm going to change the value of the select. So there's some interaction with the data flow in this little system of components. I call them compound components. These components that compound together into just kind of one idea. So the select dropdown has these 3 components, select, option, and option group, that compound into one component idea, one component system. And there's state that lives inside of that system as well. It's not application state. This isn't stuff that we want to put over in Redux or in some global store somewhere. It's not component state because my component has its own state here. This is its own little, it's a little system, this little world of components that has some state that we need to shuffle around. So let's see how we can do that. I've got all these components kind of sketched out up here. They don't do anything yet. So we've got the tab list. It just drops some styles on there and then renders the children. We've got the tab. Style renders some children. Tab panel, some style renders some children. Yeah, they don't really do anything. Ooh, here's our state. This is that little compound component state. that we were talking about. So this is the thing that tabs really deals with. What's the active index? And then it deals with which panel to show based on that active index. And then it adds the click handlers to the tabs. So that's everything that I don't want to do in my app. I don't want to have to add click handlers to these. On click, do something. I don't want to have to decide which one of these panels to render. I just want to tell tabs, here are my panels, you handle the rest. So I'm going to save this, and we'll have a mess over here. We'll have nothing even rendering, and no errors. That means I'm probably not rendering. There we go. Or I'm using promises. Just kidding. I'm not kidding, but I didn't mean to make you sad. All right, there we go. So now we're rendering all of the children. We don't know what's active. None of these click handlers work. So we got to put all this stuff back, reconstruct this thing. Let's start with picking the right panel. So right here in tab panels, I don't want to render all of these children. I want like an active index. Let's say it's 1 or 2. And then I only want to render that one. Remember, this is just data. This thing's an array. It's sitting there. It's got an active index. OK. I didn't get that from the right place, but I got the rendering to work. So that's what I'm after. I want to figure out what is the active index. I could get it from props. So I guess I could come down here to the app, and I could say tab panels. Active index is, let's do 0. So tacos should be, all right, so tacos is active back there. We already talked about, though, that this state is not anything that the app should care about. The app doesn't care what the active index is. This is the point of tabs, is to know what that index is and to render the right thing. So props aren't going to work right there. There's a different way to pass a prop to tab panels. We can do it secretly, covertly, without it even knowing. So tabs owns that state. I'm going to do a split pane here so we can see our usage below. So these children for tabs is tab list and tab panels. underneath the hood, right? The app can't even see this happening. So if I save this, we should still have tacos being active. Let's switch our active index to 1 just to prove that we've done this. There we go, and now we're on burrito. Kind of cool. So clone element is a way for us to take an element, this one, this tab panels. It didn't have an active index prop yet, but we're able to give it that property. I always want to say opaquely or transparently right now, but I don't know which one to say. We pass it that prop opaquely because you can't see that it happens. But if it's transparent, then you can't see the thing. Like I can't see the prop. It's like it's inadvertently. Oh, I meant to do it.
You delegated it to the parent to do it.
I guess so. I don't know which word to use there. So we pass the prop under the hood. Covertly. Yeah. Advertently, covertly. Okay. Let's get back to my childhood. Okay, that's cool. Let's get it to the tab list so that we can, whoa, I always forget that that's a thing now. So that we can see which one of these is active. So same thing, I just want to get it from my props. So let's come up to tab list. Here's tab list. And this is kind of interesting. I know I need to send that prop down to tab panel. So let's just clone it here. So we'll say else if child.type is tab list. Let's, yeah, I'll do that. You can fight with me in code review, but I'm just going to copy paste. So now up here in tab list, I've got the active index from my props. If this just freaked you out, do a Google for destructuring in JavaScript, and then you'll still be scratching your head for like 3 days. And then one day it'll click, and you're like, aha, that is cool. All right, so now I know the active index because it got passed covertly. And now I need to clone these, because I really need to get that down to here. So the tab is saying, hey, I need to know if I'm active or not. So I need it from this.props.isActive down in the tab as well. So tabs, the parent, let's come down here again and see how we render all this stuff. So tabs is the parent, it owns the state, it clones the tab list, passes it active index, and then we need to clone these and tell them whether or not they're active. So this is tab list, it's going to clone its tabs. We'll talk about why react.children.map instead of just map maybe later, but maybe not. If you're in the workshop tomorrow, absolutely we will. Okay, 800 by 600. So far we're doing all right. So I'm going to return clone element, and I want to tell it. That's what I was doing wrong. I knew that was going to get me. Okay. So I'm going to return a cloned element here, and I'm going to tell it whether or not it's active. So I can't just pass it active index, because then when I come down here into tab, my index has no idea what its index is in this list. It's just an item in the list. So we don't want to give it the active index. We need to just tell it whether or not it's active. And we know that one level above. We got the active index from our parent. We know the index of the children because it's our data, and map tells us that index. So now I can tell you, or I can tell it, it's active if the index in this, here, let me make sure that we can all see. Maybe we won't be able, we just can't get there with 800 by 600. There it is. Okay, so we're getting this index passed into here. Is the font size still big enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we know by checking is index equal to active index. And we're reading it right there, so this should be good. Cool. Shrink that up so we can see that again. Is disabled is just coming from our props. So that right there. Oh, I guess we called it is disabled. That's cool. Before we had to pass in this weird array and introduce a little bit of indirection, right? We're going to say, okay, at the position 1 is something going on. Like there's this indirect relationship between where we're defining something as disabled and then where we actually deal with it. Here we get to define it exactly where we're rendering it. It's pretty cool. So I should see this. Yep, that one goes to being disabled. Yeah. So the last bit here is to get those click handlers back. So I need to go to my tab. So here's my tab, and I'm going to say, and this is not accessible, so if you're into accessibility like I am, that's a different talk. But right here on click, we want to deal with this. So what do we do when we click? We need to tell somebody to do something, right? We don't know how to change the state of tabs, but that's what we want to ultimately do. We're tab, we're rendered by tab list, and that was rendered by tab. So we need to get up here and change the state up there. How do we typically have a component, when something happens inside of it, tell the outside world? Yeah, a callback, a prop callback. We give it some sort of on something. So I'm going to say this dot props dot on activate. It's a tab. It's being activated. Might happen from things other than a click, so I'm not going to call it on click. This is a different event. So when this div gets clicked, we're going to call this dot props dot on activate, and we get that from our parent tab list. So we pass that prop in. We know the index here. We don't own the state either, so we got to do something with that. Same thing, this dot props. I'm going to call it on activate tab to disambiguate it from this dot props dot on activate. So now we're calling up and saying, hey, this tab got activated, and here's the index. We know the index because it's right here in our map. This is so cool because for so long we used to like put data attributes on our elements, like data ID and stuff like that, right? And then when it gets clicked, we check event.target.getAttribute data ID, and now we knew what data to work with and what requests to make or whatever we needed to do with it. Here, we own rendering. These things are just plain old objects before they go to the DOM. And so as we create them, we can wrap up their data, like their index, right here. We don't need to rely on indirection to get that. We don't have to indirectly refer to their index by putting it somewhere else first and then retrieving it off later. We can directly use the index right here where we create the UI in the first place. That's one of the things that I love the most about React is that there's no indirection. Everything, you have a direct reference to things, a direct reference to a function, a direct reference to a React element. There's not a template with a bunch of indirection in it. Okay, so on activate tab, that needs to come from tabs, because tabs rendered the tab list. So if we're in a tab list, we're not going to send just the active index. You see, had I gone and made this dry in the first place, I would have had to go and undo that dryness later. We call that brittle code. So dry, it's brittle. Anyway, what was I passing to this? I got on my soapbox. On activate tab, I'm going to get an index that comes in here. I own the state. I'm getting an index. So let's set it. Active index is index. I'm going to do one more fun trick in ES 2015. Active index, both of these are the same thing, so I can just shorten it. Okay, so what's happening here? It worked, even though there was a bug. Maybe, maybe not. Oh, burritos can still get clicked. We missed something in tab. If we're disabled, do nothing. Okay. You know what? The people on the video didn't get to hear the click. There you go, video watchers. That felt really intimate. I was like, I was down there, had my face on the keyboard. It'll be weird when I watch this myself later. But anyway, we got the click handling happening now. So what's going on here? Let's review. I click a tab renders a div, and tab puts the click handler on it. It got a props.onActivate passed covertly to it by tab list. Tab list knew the index of the tab, and then it called props.onActivate tab covertly that was passed to it by tabs. Tabs gets that index all the way up, and then set state. So we've built now this little system of components, these compound components, that are sharing state down this tree of components and sharing state back up this tree of components, and the app doesn't have to deal with any of it. It's also not shared state, right? There's a lot of different kinds of state in an app. We've got the Redux stuff, shared state, that we put in a global store. We've got component state that's like, hey, my sidebar is open or it's closed. And then if we want to make really, really reusable components, there's this third state that lives in the middle, where it's like this is shared between a group of components, but not necessarily the whole app. Especially because, well, check this out. I heard you wanted some tabs in your tabs. So it's not app state. It's not necessarily app component state. It's a compound component state. And we can get that through this little system with a React clone element and pass it those extra props. Now check this out. Jen wouldn't have even come to my desk when she needed the tabs on the bottom. She would have gone like this. Tabs on bottom. Let's throw an H1 in there. What? Imagine the Jquery Ui option for that. Interrupting text. Or what would we call that option? I need just some arbitrary divide node. Okay. This is not the Angular meetup. I don't know what you just said. Pretty sure the syntax, though, would be like. Of course. Multi-select transclusion. Is that what you said? Okay. Oh, good. Angular 2 has Angular 1 jokes now. Welcome to the club. Oh, remember what I said? I don't like them when they're recorded. Now, like, someone's going to post this and be like, look at Ryan. He's a jerk. Boycott his workshops. Angular is a cool framework. I interviewed Mishko about it and asked a question. Why did you make it? I gave a talk at JSConf in 2014 about, it was called Angular Actimer Bone. Ember, Angular, Backbone, Polymer, and React. They gave me like 25 minutes or 30 minutes to talk about all 5 of those. It was not a very good talk. People told me afterwards it was good. It wasn't. Not enough time. Well, the scope was just too big. And anyway, he said the reason that he built it was he wanted designers to be able to create interactive web apps. And nailed it. Like, absolutely nailed it. So many people got enabled by Angular and started building really great apps. So I really don't mean that as like a slight. Sometimes people think that that's a slight. It's not. Great framework. Yeah. That's compound components. Anyone sitting out there thinking about like one of your giant components in your app that you've just not been able to quite figure out how to make this thing not so big and weird? This might be it. This might be a pattern that you could employ there. The whole point of this is to give rendering back to the app. We don't want to own how all these tabs get rendered, what order they're in, if they're on the bottom or the top. We just want to funnel that state around and add those click handlers to get that state up and down and show the right stuff. But we don't want to own all of the rendering. We want to just hand that back to the app. Some of you, however, looking at this thinking, you know, I really liked this one. It was a whole lot easier. Well, check it out. Let's call it data tabs. Let's get our tab data in here. I'm going to have to recreate it all now. What do we call it? A label was like tacos, and then a description. We had a P, tacos are good. Burritos are good too. Aren't you glad that Spanish isn't like English? We're fine with just the two. So check this out. Let's make a data tabs. And we get our data off of our props. We return some tabs. Almost got it. And then we have our tab list. Instead of our tab list, we map over the data. Make a tab. Tab.label, I think is what we called it down there. And we do the same thing for our tab panels. And then we do a tab panel in here instead, and we use tab.description. And voila. We have some upset syntax. I know that I found a good abstraction when I can do the old pattern with it. Right? I've got this code that's here. I refactor it to something that's more powerful, all these other components. But I don't need to go change the whole app. Anywhere that we had tabs, I just have to import data tabs now on all those files. And now with data tabs, I can just do the exact thing I used to do. But there's a whole different implementation underneath that's a lot more flexible. And we could do our crazy tabs on bottom stuff in here if we wanted to, and completely re-implement that old API. Yeah, that's it. That's compound components. I'm going to end it there. We can do questions afterward, but don't want to record the questions on there. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.